Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Inshallah, for those that have already tuned in, we'll be starting shortly. I pray that you are well and excited about the iftar tonight, inshallah. I hear there's going to be some nice things on the menu. So, can't help but think about food. Subhanallah. Human being is so weak. Bismillah. Okay, so it's 2 o'clock, inshallah. I think we can go ahead and get started. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا جمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل فينا ولا منا شقيا ولا محروما اللهم اجعل عملنا كله صالحا واجعله لوجهك خالصا ولا تجعل فيه لأحد غيرك شيئا رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Dear respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to Zakah Made Easy, a practical guide on how to pay your zakah. Inshallah, today, during this session, zakah is it's a huge topic. And so, when we study fiqh of zakah, you do it over several weeks. And that's just the basics over several weeks, not to include, the contemporary issues and all the legal reasoning that goes into that. So, in about an hour or so, really what our goal is to learn the theory at a high level. So to understand the zakah, some of the objectives of zakah, some of the conditions and principles of zakah, but then really to understand how to give it practically, especially in a world that is where wealth is increasingly different than what the original zakah categories are, right? So it's not as clear. So inshallah, we hope to expand on that bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Some logistical items. When I teach, for those that attend my sessions, that I like to be very interactive and speak to the audience, especially with fiqh. Fiqh is one of those topics that is much easier to give and take. With this type of streaming on YouTube, it's really difficult to do that. So if you would like to join Zoom, you can go to the link on the bottom left, and throughout the presentation, these links will stay there. So just go to bit.ly/MFCZakah, and that will reroute you to the Zoom call. If you would like to join on Zoom, interrupt me via audio, no problem. I'm happy for you to do that. So please, I would encourage you, if you do have Zoom, to use Zoom as opposed to YouTube, so that if you have a question, you can simply just interrupt me and ask, and I'll be totally fine with that, inshallah. The other thing is, if you would like to submit a question anonymously, there is a link on the bottom right of the screen. You can see bit.ly/zakah question. And if you go to that, it will reroute you to a form in which you can submit a question anonymously. I will be monitoring the questions on that form on my other screen here. So when I look this way, it's because I am looking at my other screen. I have 2 monitors. I'll also try my best to monitor the questions on YouTube. It's difficult to monitor 4 things or 3 things. So apologies if I don't get to it right away, but you can keep pestering until I do, inshallah. No problem. Okay, so with that said, again, if you'd like to join on Zoom, for those that are joining us, just go to that link on the bottom left. And if you have a question, on the bottom right, you can type that in your browser. Okay, alhamdulillah. And I'll admit you as you join the room. So just try to mute yourself as you come in, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan. Okay, so here we go. Bismillah. Okay, so yesterday during the khutbah, we spoke a little bit about this, but as a recap, let's talk about what is zakah. Zakah linguistically comes from the trilateral root in Arabic, za, kaf, ya, which can mean one of 2 things. It can either mean purity, right? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى. Same root. He is successful, the one who purifies himself, right? So it can mean purity. It also means to grow. And so the process of growing, it comes from the same root. Islamically, zakah is a prescribed charity. And by prescribed here, it means that there is a specific percentage and it is done in a specific way. This is important, and I'll speak about it in a minute. On specific assets rather, that should be paid for specific recipients, right? So this is important, that it is prescribed charity to prescribed specific recipients. The reason this is important is to outline the fact that zakat is not a tax. A tax is done for a very utilitarian purpose where money needs to be collected so that it can be distributed for any number of purposes. Zakat is different. As we mentioned in the Jummah reminder yesterday, zakat both has a religious, purely religious, ritualistic element, and it has a rational element. The ritualistic element of zakat is that zakat is made an obligation upon the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that we can purify ourselves, purify our wealth, and purify the ones we are giving the wealth to. This is really important. These three things. So that is the purpose of zakah. The primary objective, as Allah says in the verse that obligated zakat to begin with, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُطَهِّرُهُمْ وَتُزَكِّيهِمْ بِهَا وَصَلِّ عَلَيْهِمْ إِنَّ صَلَاتَكَ سَكَنٌ لَهُمْ. In Surah At-Tawbah, God Almighty says, take from their wealth a sadaqah. It's important to realize anytime sadaqah is mentioned in the Quran, it is synonymous with zakah. Sadaqah and zakah are one of the same. It is simply the context that dictates whether it is the 2.5% obligatory zakah or just additional charity. So Allah says, take from their wealth a sadaqah, i.e. zakah, through which they can purify themselves with it. تُطَهِّرُهُمْ وَتُزَكِّيهِمْ بِهَا. Right? And then Allah says, وَصَلِّ عَلَيْهِمْ, and pray upon them, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And many of the scholars actually understood this to mean not only Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but also anyone after, when he gives zakah or she gives zakah, she should pray for the one that she gives zakah to. There's difference of opinion amongst the scholars. Does this prayer mean the salah that is mentioned here, or is it just a general prayer? May Allah bless them. May Allah give them barakah in the money. But it's important that to make dua for the person you give zakat to. So it is prescribed. That is the ritualistic element here. The way it is in which it's prescribed cannot all be rationalized. The 2.5%, for instance. You can take some guesses as to why that number. Why not 3%? It's because God said so. Because at the core of our Islamic faith is that we submit to God. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us even in these small details. Actually, specifically in these small details, there's an incredible verse in Surah Al-Ma'idah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَيَبْلُوَنَّكُمُ اللَّهُ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الصَّيْدِ تَنَالُهُ أَيْدِيكُمْ وَرِمَاحُكُمْ لِيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ مَنْ يَخَافُهُ بِالْغَيْبِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O you who believe, Allah, God Almighty, will test you with the rules of hunting that you sought with your shooting or with your hands, so that Allah knows who truly fears him in regards to the matters of the unseen. And so part of the test of obligations is to see, are we going to submit to the details, right? And so zakat is prescribed, in that sense, so that we can follow the details in it. Zakat is not a tax. We've spoken about this before. And so that's why we should not try to find ways around it. See, this is key, that if when we're giving a lot of zakat, as we're going to come to see today, intention plays a vital role in the process of zakat. So if our intention, when we are creating investing in financial instruments and assets, is actually to get around paying zakat because we may think that is similar to a tax, this is extremely problematic. And in fact, the jurists will treat assets of that nature differently, meaning that if a person is actually trying to invest in something specifically to get around how he pays his assets so that he can avoid liquidating perhaps some of his assets, then they will actually treat the ruling on that zakat differently, right? And at the end of the day, when we speak about jurisprudence, the fiqh, fiqh literally means deep understanding, but it's come to mean like the detailed rulings of halal and haram, roughly speaking. When we come to speak of fiqh, it's important to realize that we do not live our lives according to rules of fiqh. We live our lives with taqwa. You see, taqwa, God consciousness, fear of God, awareness of God around us, and our obligation to worship him is what should be the driving factor in our life. Because when it comes to fiqh and fatwa, you can actually find, and very specifically in Islamic finance, any position you want. One of our teachers always laughs when he asks a question. When he's teaching, he says, what do you think the answer is? And then he'll say, you can confidently answer yes or no, because there's confidently a position in both of them, right? You'll always find positions. However, if taqwa, if fear of God, if God consciousness, if being very scrupulous and cautious is what drives your relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal, then you'll always be on the safe side. However, when I teach this, it's important for me to teach according to what the positions of our scholars are, in order to meet the objectives of zakah. And if you want to be more cautious in that, that is preferred if you're able to, right? So just some footnotes. Zakah, of course, is next to prayer in importance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions zakah in the Quran over 82 times, and it's always next to prayer for the most part. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ, establish prayer and give from your charity, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says on the day of judgment about the people who in hellfire, they would say, قَالُوا لَمْ نَكُ مِنَ الْمُصَلِّينَ, we were not from those that prayed, nor were we those from that fed the needy. And we would be engaged in distractions along with others, right? So zakah, it's important to recognize its criticality in our faith, and treat it with that scrupulousness, right? And so that's why we should understand how to give zakah, and it's probably zakah and inheritance, maybe inheritance more so than zakah, are two of the things that people really don't know how to give. And so, it's important that we remind ourselves constantly. Inshallah, as I teach this, when there are issues where there's difference of opinion, it's difficult to highlight all of them, but on the critical issues, I will mention them, inshallah. I'll tell you what I personally prefer based on my teachers and the fiqh councils. But then if you choose something else, and you have different teachers and you learned in a different way previously, there's nothing wrong with that, inshallah. Again, if you have questions, you can always submit questions anonymously in that link on the bottom right. You can join on Zoom on the bottom left, that link bit.ly/MFCZakat. It will put you in the Zoom conference, and you can interrupt me at any time. I will be monitoring the questions as they come in, but please do mention them as they come in, because it'll be easier for me to address, inshallah, as the questions come to your mind. Okay, some of the conditions concerning the person who is giving the zakah. Number one, that they are Muslim. So zakah is not an obligation upon the non-Muslim, right? That they are sane, because the pen is lifted upon the one who has lost his sanity, or the insane. Freedom is an important one, not as applicable today, at least in our context here. But in a society where there were slaves, then slaves were not obligated to pay zakah. Not being in debt, such that the debt takes one below the nisab. And we're going to talk about what nisab is. So the idea here is that if a person has debt, and this debt is the immediate payment that the immediate payments that they need to give with this debt, right? So let's put the situation of mortgages and student loans and things like that on the side, because those are long-term debts in which, if you were to subtract your assets from those long-term debts, most of us wouldn't be giving zakah. So what you do is you actually look at your upcoming payment. So if you have credit cards, if you have student loans, if you have mortgages, whatever it may be, car payments, look at your upcoming payments. And if you're indebted to someone and you're supposed to give that money at a specific time, subtract that from your zakatable assets. And if that takes a person below the threshold, then they are not obliged to give the zakah. Adulthood is a condition that is deferred upon. There's a difference of opinion on. Adulthood means the Hanafi say that one must be an adult to give the zakah, because a child, one who has not reached the age of puberty, is not held in account for his actions. So how could he give zakah? The remainder of the scholars, and the base of this presentation is according to the Hanafi madhab, but I'll point out differences when there are. The remainder of the scholars, they say no, zakat is a right upon the money. It's not only an obligation upon an individual, but it's also a right on the money itself. So what does this mean? It means that if you are entrusted with the money of an orphan, for example, then you must give zakah from that. You must give zakah from the money of the orphan. There's a tradition in this in which the Prophet ﷺ tells one of the companions, and it's the authenticity of this hadith is questions, but he says that work the money of the orphan, meaning circulate it, invest it, so it doesn't stay stagnant, right? But not and so that the sadaqah does not eat up his money. Meaning that in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is pointing out that the interest of the orphan is so important here that if you invest the money, then less zakah will be taken out of that money, which is okay because the orphan needs that money and needs his right to be able to to take care of himself after he reaches of age. Anyway, without going into too much details on that. Bismillah. Okay, conditions concerning the wealth. The first condition, so this is concerning the wealth itself. In order for it to be a zakatable wealth, what are the conditions of that? Number one is tamamul mulk, right? The complete ownership. Complete ownership is ownership in which you actually own the money, number one. So what does that mean? For instance, a trust, an endowment, state funds, none of that would be zakatable. A prevalent example that's always given is the oil, in the Gulf countries. If it's owned actually by the state itself, and that's not zakatable wealth, right? If it's privatized, it's a different story, right? But if it's owned by the state, it's not, because a person doesn't own it, right? So a person must own the money. That's number one. Number two, you actually have access to the money, right? And that access can be restricted access, or it could be full access, but whatever portion you have access to is a condition. An example of something you don't have access to is like a security deposit you make on a property. So you might be renting and you make a security deposit with your landlord. So that money you actually own it. That's your money because you have a right to it. However, you don't have access to the money. And so in that case, you will not it's not zakatable wealth, so to speak. Another condition is that it is not revocable, and this is in the case of dowry. There's certain cases here in dowry where this becomes relevant, but inshallah, I'm not going to go actually into details on that. So that's number one, complete ownership. As it pertains to retirement accounts and stuff, just inshallah, hold on. We're going to go into detail about that in a bit. Because yeah, you have access, but not really. So where do we stand on that? Inshallah, we'll talk about it later. Suffice to say right now that you need complete ownership of the wealth. Number two, hawl, that the passing of an entire Islamic lunar year. This is important for gold, silver, fiat currencies, cash in hand, business merchandise. You need the hawl to pass. For agricultural things that come from the earth, so treasure troves and mines, metals, as well as free grazing livestock. I'm not going to go into those details, but just so you understand the theory, for those things you actually have to give, not free grazing livestock, but the agriculture, things that come from the earth, you have to give the zakah when it is harvested. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَآتُوا حَقَّهُ يَوْمَ حَصَادِهِ, and give its right on the day that it is harvested. So you don't actually wait an entire year after that. So that's number one. And it's important that it's a lunar year, right? So that's why a lot of people like to tie their zakah with Ramadan for the blessings of Ramadan, but it doesn't need to be Ramadan as long as it is tied to the lunar year. That's number two. Number three, the nisab, the threshold nisab. And inshallah, we're going to talk about nisab in a little bit. And number four, that wealth grows. So if it's not growing, it's not wealth. It's not zakatable wealth. Whether that growth is actual or it's potent growth, like it's potential growth. Like money doesn't actually grow physically, but it grows in value, right? It has the potential of growth. There's risk associated with that. So it can also decrease, but that's a point, right? It's something moving. So wealth needs to be moving in order for it to be zakatable. Okay, so in terms of like this first condition concerning wealth, hawl, we spoke about ownership. Hawl is from the time your wealth meets the threshold nisab. So let's take an example. The threshold nisab, we're going to discuss in a little bit if it's going to be based on gold. So let's say you have cash and we're basing it on gold, is 85 grams of gold, which is roughly 4,000 some dollars. Almost three ounces of gold, right? So let's say you cross the threshold nisab on Rajab first, so you go above that nisab, then that's when your hawl starts. So if you're kind of fluctuating over and under that number for your zakatable assets, your nisab starts, your hawl starts when you first cross that threshold of the nisab. For many of us, alhamdulillah, Allah has blessed us and we have been over the nisab for a long time. But for those that are fluctuating between these numbers, then it starts once you go over it, right? It must be a lunar year, right? To make this easy, designate a day. It could be in Ramadan, it could be in Sha'ban. Many of the tabi'in, they used to love to do it in Sha'ban, actually, so that they're Ramadan, so they can prepare for Ramadan, so they can come Ramadan in a pure state. So, I do mine in Sha'ban, but it doesn't need to be. You're allowed to give your zakat in advance. We're going to talk about that later. So even if your date is in Ramadan, but something happens and you want to give zakat on an ongoing basis and you intend for it to be part of your zakat, you can deduct it on the time you actually give your zakat. We'll talk about that, inshallah. If you are going to do a solar year, so there are some times where doing a solar year is warranted because of difficulty of calculating inventory for specific types of businesses, right? If that's the case, and this is the exception to the rule, then you can do it on a solar year. It's like, because if you give your zakat late, it's accepted. It's just a debt you have with Allah, right? So you just have to record the debt. That's it. And so you would pay 2.577%, which accounts kind of for the discrepancy between the solar and the lunar year. But I think for the vast majority of us, we wouldn't fall in this situation. Okay, what is zakatable? So zakatable assets are, generally speaking, of four types. There are more like subtypes, we're not going to talk about them. So especially when it comes to livestock and when it comes to what's produced from the land, there are a number of like different things. Honey, what about if a person finds like a treasure? We're not going to talk about most of that because it's, for most people, it's not relevant. If it is relevant to you, you can reach out offline to me, inshallah, we can speak about it. But the first type of zakatable wealth is free grazing domesticated livestock, sa'ima, right? Free grazing domesticated livestock, which by free grazing, this means that it is grazing on public pasturage, right? If it's grazing on cultivated lands, then it doesn't fall in this category. Now, a person might say, does that mean that like all of these factory farmers that have thousands of chickens eating grain in a warehouse, does that mean that they're not zakatable? They are zakatable, but not under this category. They're zakatable as business merchandise. So they're considered business merchandise, but they're not considered from this, which has a very specific type of zakat that you give on it, right? And that zakat, generally speaking, is done in kind, so to speak. So anyway, number two, what is produced or extracted from the land? So that's specific types of crops, not all of crops. Mined metals, treasure troves, you can add to this category honey if you want to. It has a different ruling. The Hanafis say the horses, although that's a deferred thing. But anyway, just to give you an idea, again, if this is all for personal use, none of this is zakatable, right? This is, again, if you have over a specific threshold, and we're not going to go into a lot of details on number 1 and 2. Gold, silver, and fiat currency. So anything that is used as a currency would take the ruling of gold and silver, right? And then business merchandise. So we're not going to talk about these two today. Again, if you have questions on free grazing, domesticated livestock, or what is extracted from the land, we can speak offline, inshallah. But we want to talk about what is most relevant to our audience. But we will speak about these two, right? And all of the categories, actually. So think of every category: stocks, retirement accounts, real estate. All of that can fall under one of these two, depending on the situation. So they will roughly fall under one of these two categories, right? Inshallah, we're going to talk about each one of these individually. Okay, what is the nisab? Nisab is the minimum amount which makes zakah obligatory. If it is in silver, that is equal to about 595 grams, according to some standards of silver, which is about close to $300. I spot priced this today. If it is gold, then it is roughly equal to 85 grams of gold, which is about this number, $4,681, right? Now, if you actually own gold or silver, then you would have to meet the threshold for those specific currencies, right? So if you have silver it is not zakatable silver unless it is greater than 595 grams of silver. If you have gold, it is not zakatable unless you have greater than 85 grams, or about 3 ounces of gold. For currency and business merchandise, we use gold as our standard. Now, this goes against the Hanafi madhab, which I said I'm presenting from. The Hanafis, generally speaking, use silver. That is their standard. If in other currencies, you use the silver standard. However, Shah Waliullah Dihlavi, he has something really nice in his Hujjah, in which he says the reason silver and that number was used during the time of the Prophet ﷺ was that because this was generally the amount that a person would have in order to sustain their family and their everyday expenses. For anyone who, for anyone who is here in the States, you would know that $300, if that's all you have in zakatable assets, that's probably not enough. That's dire. So most of the fiqh councils, the Fiqh Academy of the World Fiqh Council, the biggest fiqh council that there is today, Fiqh Council of North America, many others, they would use gold because that seems like a much more reasonable amount to base things off of. For many of us, alhamdulillah, this might be for many people, especially in this county, this might be a theoretical discussion, but it's important to understand. So we're going to be using the gold standard. So the way you do this, Khalid, did you have a question?
No.
All right. I'm going to mute you if that's okay. There you go. Okay, alhamdulillah. But yeah, feel free, for those that are in Zoom, feel free to interrupt at any time. There's no problem with that. And if you would like to join Zoom, the link is going to be on the bottom left in the next slide, inshallah. So the way you do this is you combine all your personal, when you give your zakah, anything that is zakatable, you would combine your personal cash, your zakatable business wealth, your stocks to come up with your nisab, right? And it's not nisab for your nisab, right? So like you would join cash, business merchandise, all as part of the same bucket, and gold and silver as their own bucket. A person might ask, why don't you add animals to this for free grazing animals? And the reason is because business merchandise is one of the things that you're not supposed to pay in kind, right? So imagine I'm a trader of nails, like I sell nails at Home Depot or something. You don't give nails and your merchandise in kind because that's not going to be of benefit to the needy. The whole purpose here is what can we do to benefit the needy? And so what you do with business merchandise is that you always use currency to give it out. For other things, the preference is to do it in kind. The Hanafis allow giving its value's worth. The others don't. So because of that, business merchandise is added in the same bucket with your personal cash in hand, all of that other good stuff, which we're going to get to see if it reaches the minimal threshold, what we're calling the nisab. Okay, so this is our game plan, and we're going to go through each one of these. How you calculate your zakah. Number one, you determine your zakatable wealth. So you make that calculation. Before you do that, you need to purify your haram wealth. Haram wealth can be something very obvious, like in a savings account, the interest that is gained, that is profited from a savings account is haram. You don't give zakah on that. You actually have to get rid of it completely, right? So any haram wealth that is invested, the capital belongs to you, but any profit that is a result of that must be purified. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِن تُبْتُمْ فَلَكُمْ رُؤُوسُ وَإِن تُبْتُمْ فَلَكُمْ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِكُمْ لَا تَظْلِمُونَ وَلَا تُظْلَمُونَ. If you repent from riba, this is in the verses of interest and usury of riba, then the capital of your wealth is yours. You are not to be wronged, nor are you to oppress anyone else, right? You get what you get. If you have, for instance, if you've invested in stocks or any type of stock mutual fund portfolio, then you would have to look at what you've invested in. If part of that portfolio includes bonds and securities are haram by consensus. So again, you would have to purify any gain over time that is a result of those bonds and securities. And hopefully, inshallah, stop investing in bonds and securities. Like choose a portfolio that is stocks only, that maybe work with one of the Islamic portfolio managers and assets that they have. Another example is if you do have like a 401k or just a mutual fund portfolio, you would need to look at what types of stocks are being invested in, right? So if the stocks are in the entertainment industry and alcohol, gambling, weapons manufacturing, um, any number of things like that, all of that money, the profit from it is haram. So that must be purified before you give zakah. That must be purified, right? This is really important. And in fact, this is one of the things I was speaking to a friend of mine who's a financial whiz. And he said, this is one of the things most people, they just don't know. Like they don't understand their assets, right? So roughly speaking, you can look at your portfolio, and take a look at the categories of stocks in there and bonds, and then purify and you estimate, right? A lot of the things here involves estimation because knowing it exactly is really difficult. So that's step number one in 1A. Determine your zakatable wealth and purify the haram portion of it. You subtract any upcoming payments, as well as debts, which is an important one that I missed here. Then you calculate when you reach the nisab. So if I reached the nisab on Rajab the 5th, then you add 1 lunar year to that. And then you pay zakat on the total amounts. Assuming there is no agricultural products here or livestock, then it's 2.5%.
Sami, Assalamu alaikum, this is Ubaid.
Alaikum salam. Alaikum salam.
How do you purify haram wealth?
Good question. So the way you purify haram wealth, there's a difference of opinion on this. Can the wealth go to like a charitable cause, or does it need to be some type of like public project, like building a bridge or a water well or something like that? Inshallah, either is okay. You know, I would say the one thing most likely to avoid is for the building of a mosque. Because the building of a mosque, there's a little bit more scrupulousness in terms of the wealth that is used to build a mosque. But you can use it to give the needy, to give those to any sadaqah, to any type of, well, it's not really sadaqah, but any type of charitable cause that you want, inshallah. That's the opinion that my teachers follow. So you can, again, I would avoid the building of a mosque, but any other charitable cause should be okay. If you want to take the other opinion, then it would have to be some sort of public works project. Building a bridge, a well, paving streets, something like that. Does that answer your question, Brother Abaid?
Yeah, Jazakallah.
Okay, next slide, inshallah. I don't know, I thought I moved all of these little boxes, but I guess I didn't. So yeah, if you want to join Zoom, you can go to bit.ly/ what is it? MFC Zakah, bit.ly/MFC Zakah, and it will forward you to the Zoom. Okay, where are we? Okay, determine your zakatable wealth. So these are roughly the categories of zakatable wealth. Again, for those of you that are joining late, we're not including the things that come from the land, agriculture products, as well as free grazing livestock. We're not going to speak about that today. So this is the last two categories of currency, gold, silver, as well as business merchandise. So cash on hand. Cash on hand is, I traveled to Italy last year, and I have like some euros that I have in an envelope, right? That you need to include that as part of your zakatable wealth. Or I have a piggy bank. You know, again, you can estimate these things if they're difficult to calculate, but you know, be generous with how you estimate. Be generous with Allah. Your checking account, obviously, all your checking accounts and your assets. Your savings account, of course, you have to, again, the capital of your savings account. You'd have to purify any interest that comes from it. Gold, if above the nisab of gold is 85 grams, roughly, we said 3 ounces. Silver, if it is above the nisab. There's a big question here. Does that include personal jewelry? The Hanafis say yes, it includes personal jewelry. The rest of the scholars say no, it does not include personal jewelry if the intention when purchasing it was that I'm purchasing this as jewelry. Now, the intention matters. So the position that I follow, being a Hanafi, is that personal jewelry is included. However, it's important that a person calculates what the real value of their jewelry is, because you know, it could be of a lesser standard of gold, like 14 or 16 carats or something like that. It could be mixed with a diamond or something else. And precious metals do not have zakat on them. It is just gold and silver. So platinum and diamonds and rubies and all of that other good stuff is not zakatable. as a rule of thumb. So in order to do this, you can go to a jeweler and you can get an estimate of the real value of the gold or silver. And if it is above the threshold, the nisab, then it is zakatable, even if it is personal jewelry that is intended for wearing. Debts owed, right? So if someone owes you money, that is roughly categorized into a good debt and a bad debt, and we're going to speak about it, but that is zakatable wealth if it is a good debt, inshallah. And we're going to speak about that in detail. Shares and stocks, restricted access accounts is zakatable, and we'll speak about how to do that. Business merchandise. So if I own a restaurant, the merchandise that is part of my business, in addition to the cash flow of the business, minus liabilities, that will be zakatable, right? The tools you use to make a product or to sell something are not zakatable wealth. They call that qunya. It takes the ruling of personal possessions. So like if I have a tractor that I use to in my farm, that is not zakatable. If I own buildings that I operate my business out of, that is not zakatable, right? But what is zakatable is the merchandise as well as the profit that comes from that business. We'll talk about real estate and illiquid assets, inshallah. So the first 5, I think, are easy. Cash on hand, checking account. I think that's all very, very straightforward. So we'll start speaking about number 6, right? So debts. You only add good debts, or if you're running a business, your accounts receivable, if you know what that is, to your zakatable wealth. A good debt is one that you expect the person to pay back and they have the ability. So a way to explain this is, let's say Brother Obaid's lend me $100, right? And I need to give the money back, and Sammy has the money to give back to Brother Obaid, but Brother Obaid tells me, you know what, you don't need to give it back today. I'm going to see you next week anyway at Jumu'ah, just give it back to me then. In that case, Brother Obaid has no fear that this money is not going to come back to him. And he knows that if he were to ask me, I would return it. That is a good debt. Good debts need to be added to your assets, right? A bad debt is one where the person knows that the one that he lent the money to does not have the ability because they're in a difficult financial situation, and or they refuse, or they denied it to begin with. So in all of those cases, remember we spoke about access being important in wealth. In all of these cases, the one who gave the money does not have access to the wealth, and therefore they are not to be added to his or her zakatable assets. Stocks. So
Actually,
stocks,
Sammy, a quick question if you don't mind.
go ahead. Yeah.
For, let's say you have a bad debt and then you received it after the zakat period. Somebody paid you back that you never thought would pay you back. Do you pay past zakat on that or not?
No, that just gets added. So that's a good question, and that just gets added to your wealth, and it will be calculated on the next hawl, the next time, your next zakat due date, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question, Khalid?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Okay, as it pertains to stocks, we can roughly categorize stocks into 2 types. There's different ways of doing this, and different scholars and fiqh councils have done different things. But what I follow here, which is the position of the World Fiqh Council, is you can roughly categorize it into 2. One is active investments. An active investment is one that is constantly traded, right? So really what you're looking for is the delta between buying and selling. If a person is engaged in day trading or active trading of stocks, then the ruling on the stocks is that it takes the same ruling as cash in your pocket, because it's going to be liquidated very quickly. And so you treat it as though it is cash, as though it is currency. And so the zakat that is due is the market value of your shares, not what the shares are purchased for. It is always the market value. And the reason for this is, remember, we said one of the conditions of the wealth is that it grows. So the scholars, they say that al-mu'tabar al-numu, what is to be taken into account is the growth or the loss, right? Not the purchase price. You always look at what the market value is the day that you want to give your zakat, the zakat due date. There is a position of Ibn Abbas that is mentioned by Ibn Rushd, Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, that it is on the purchase price. However, most of the scholars, I don't want to say none, most of the scholars don't take that position. So the market value is what's important. I will address the question of illiquid assets. What if the market took a downturn and my goods actually aren't worth much and no one's buying them anyway, right, on the market today? We'll speak about that inshallah shortly. So that's an active investment. For the vast majority of us, if we have stocks, they're passive. And by passive, you can roughly say, I'm sitting on this for over a year because it's a long-term investment for me, right? Either because I'm hoping to gain profit from dividends or I'm hoping to cash it out at a later period. In that case, we're going to call this a passive investment. It takes the ruling of trading goods, right? Not the ruling of cash, which means it is a business. And on a business, you only pay zakah on the inventory and the cash and the profit, right? So you can roughly, if you had your balance sheet, you can take a look at the cash equivalents, the receivables, and the inventories, and you add that together, right? And you divide it by the number of shares that you own, and you calculate what the zakatable portion of that company is, right? And you also add the dividends that you receive every year on this stock. This will vary from company to company. And this is very difficult, especially if you have your mutual fund, many stocks that are invested in. It's going to be really difficult to calculate this company by company. Some people might have kind of the ability to do this, and they have the financial kind of skill set to do it. Sorry. However, not everyone does. Companies like Azad and Amana, I don't know about Amana, but Azad definitely calculates this for you. And they make it easy for you. Even though the way they do it, they use a different formula. They differentiate between a growth fund and a income fund, right? That's not what we're doing here. But anyway, that's an acceptable way. So if whatever Azad gives you, that will be your kind of the zakah that is due on the thing. And they make your life easy. However, for you, let's say with your company, you invest in some type of mutual fund. Now you purified your wealth after that, right? How do I calculate? So roughly speaking, about a third to a half, depending on the type of stock and what that company trades in, about a third of its assets to about half of its assets will make up for the zakatable portion of the stock. So as an example, let's say I own 1,000 stocks shares at a value of $20 a share, right? So that's $20,000. So then you multiply that by 30%, 0.3. And so therefore, you're actually, the zakatable wealth as part of your shares is only $6,000, right? Now, when you decide to cash out, if you've now made that intention to cash out, you treat this investment just like an active investment, and you would pay zakat on the entire amount, right? But as long as it is considered a passive investment and you're still in it for the long term, so to speak, then you would only give zakat on the zakatable assets, roughly speaking, again, a third to a half, right? And again, a lot of this is estimation. But in the absence of solid data and the ability to do this, an estimation is okay, inshallah. If you have liquid assets and Allah has given you, always estimate higher. Always take the conservative opinion. So there is an opinion on stocks that stocks are due on the entire fund. So there's no differentiation between active and passive. That's an opinion. If you have the assets, always look to the benefit of those who are in need. So always give more. And that's taking the cautious position. So as Muslims, we're encouraged to take the cautious position on an individual level for yourself. As I'm teaching you, I can't teach the cautious opinion for everyone. That's not how it works, right? However, for yourself, if you are in a position of ease, then take the cautious opinion for yourself. If you have questions on stocks, you can type them in you can submit them in this form, inshallah, and I have the form up, so I'm able to see any submissions. Okay, so let's go back here. So we talked about debts, we talked about stocks. Now let's talk about retirement accounts. Okay, remember earlier on, we said that you need to have full ownership of retirement accounts. Full ownership of your wealth, complete ownership of your wealth in order to pay zakat on it. So the question arises, is a retirement account considered complete ownership because of that issue with access of it. And there is difference of opinion on this, right? One opinion that some people follow is that because you don't have access to it, then you only pay zakat on it once when you cash it out upon your retirement, meeting the life-changing event, whatever that is, 59 and a half years old, or whatever that number is, right? That's one opinion. Another opinion is that you don't pay zakat on it while you don't have access. However, you have to calculate the zakat and pay it retroactively when you cash it out. And I'll speak about that in a bit. And the opinion that my teachers follow is the following. What you need to do is that you need to figure out how much do I actually have access to, which for most retirement accounts and 401k accounts is you can actually withdraw it, but there are taxes and penalties that are put upon you for withdrawing it, right? So whatever that net amount is after taxes and penalties is what you have true ownership of, and everything else you don't. So let's say, for instance, I have $300,000 in a retirement account, and my zakat due date, ZDD, I want to give my zakat today. Taxes and penalties for early withdrawal, let's say, is about 30%. So that's $90,000. So I subtract that, right? And then, so I have 210,000. Then because it is a retirement account is most of the time is a mutual fund. It is some type of mixture of stocks and bonds, hopefully not bonds. Again, you need to purify anything before you do this, like to reiterate that. But let's assume it's a halal fund. Then you would only pay zakah on the zakatable assets of part of those companies, which we said is roughly a third to a half. So of that $210,000, you multiply that, let's say, by 0.3, then you get $63,000 that are zakatable. And 2.5% of that is $1,575. So out of $300,000, you're paying $1,575 in zakat today. Now, this is opinion I follow. There's other opinions, but what I will caution from is having zakat havens, where you have large amounts of money in a mutual fund, and you don't have enough liquid assets to pay for that zakat. That's problematic. It's not all the time. There are circumstances where it might be out of your control, but generally speaking, we want to calculate our zakah. So for instance, let's say I don't have the money, and I calculate and I say, let's say this number is 3 million instead of 300,000. Let's make it a little bit more interesting. So this would be 15,750 that you need to give. You might not have those liquid assets to give it. So what you do is on your zakat due date, you make a note of it, you calculate it, and you say, I owe $15,750. And that becomes a debt with Allah. That becomes a debt with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you have to liquidate some of your retirement accounts with a penalty to do that, so be it. If you need to wait until you cash it out when you retire, that's an option, right? But the point is that you calculate it, and now it's a debt with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that needs to be paid. So this is what I just mentioned here, right? You can defer the payment until you have liquid assets. It's considered a debt with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What if you don't have any access at all? So there are specific types of retirement accounts that you're locked in. And if that's the case, then there's no zakat due. And the reason for that, again, is because you have no real ownership. You have no ownership or access whatsoever, even with a penalty. Now, there is a nuance here. Especially in the Arab countries, they have these types of accounts where you invest your money and you only get access to it in 10 or 15 years when your kids reach college age, and you have zero access before them. So it's a little different than a college savings account that are here in the sense that there's no access, right? Now, if a person puts their money there willingly, right, then the ruling is that the entire amount is zakat, even though they don't have access, because they willingly made a decision to put their money in that, right? As opposed to a 401k where there's a serious incentive of a company matching, or that it's a little different in that sense, right? Wallahu ta'ala alam. Allah knows best. Okay. The next category is business merchandise. So zakat is only due on your merchandise and your profit. Again, it's not due on any like capital that you have, machines, buildings where you work out, web servers, if that's what your thing is, the grill in your restaurant. None of that is zakatable wealth. The only thing that is zakatable is the merchandise that you have and the profit that you make from the business. For real estate, there is no zakat that is due on personal property or investment property that you're sitting on. Now, this is the Maliki position. It's not the Hanafi position, but everyone gives fatwa according to this position now. And the reason for that is that there's a lot of people don't own property in the way that they used to. And so renting is very common now. So what happens a lot of times is that you'll have a mother who inherited land from her family or inherited a house, and she's holding on to it so that she can benefit her children with it. That's a very common scenario. And so because of the how common this type of thing is, most of the scholars and most of the fiqh councils now all give fatwa according to this, which is you don't give the zakah on the personal property. If it's, on any investment property that you're sitting on, right? Now, if someone is just their intention is just trying to avoid zakah, so they're just purchasing a lot of land and keeping it in there so that they can avoid zakah, the ruling on them is different because they have a loophole. They're trying to make use of a loophole, and there's no loopholes with Allah Azza wa Jal. Again, this is not a tax. That this person who does this is accountable to Allah Azza wa Jal. So they should give zakah on the entire property. But for the vast majority of person, they don't. So if I have 3-4 properties, they're all mine. I'm sitting on them. I have no intention to sell them today. You don't give zakah on it. What if I have a property and I want to flip it? So I purchased it with the intention of flipping it right away. Then that's treated like cash in hand. And so the entire market value of the property is zakatable. And if it's illiquid due to a downturn in the market, it takes a ruling of illiquid assets that we mentioned earlier. What if I have a property and I'm benefiting from the rental income? So I bought a property and I'm renting it out. Then the only zakat is on the profit from that rental property, which is your rental income minus any taxes, mortgage that you're paying on the property if you are, etc. And then you just take that bucket of money and you add it to the remainder of your cash, currency, business merchandise, etc., to see if it reaches an nisab, and you give zakah on that. Yeah, we spoke about this, right? So if the market took a downturn and you have merchandise you're unable to sell, the merchandise follows the same ruling as land that is purchased as long as a long-term investment. And the reason for that is it's almost the same. Like you're unable to do anything with it at that point. So you don't give zakat on it until it's in a more sellable state and things, inshallah, improve. Okay, so those were the 10 or 11 categories that I mentioned of giving zakah. So let's be a little bit more practical right now. And we have about 5 or 10 minutes. So how to give your zakah. Number one, when you give zakat, at the moment you're giving it, it has to be intention that this is for zakah. What I mean by this is that if last month I gave sadaqah to someone and I never had the intention with zakah, and then a month later I try to retroactively change it to zakah, that's not permissible. You can't do that. That was sadaqah, right? So you can't backtrack a sadaqah that was given. There's no harm whatsoever of giving your zakat to a tax-deductible 501c3 organization and benefiting from the tax deduction. There's no problem whatsoever, but it's not necessary. This is key. In fact, most of the scholars say that it is preferable that you give zakat to the person who is in need. You yourself give it, not to an organization. Organizations facilitate things for us. They might give us a tax benefit, so on and so forth. That's great, but there is a spiritual benefit. There's an imani benefit of having a relationship with those that are in need and giving it to them, right? Whether they don't need to know that it's zakat, by the way. It could just say, I'm just helping you out or whatever. They don't need to know that this is your actual zakat money, right? But you can, as I said, you can always give it to an organization. So that's the first thing. Number two, the scholars unanimously agree that it is preferable to give zakat to your locality. In fact, the Hanabila, the Shafi'is, the Malikis only allow you to give zakat to your locality, right? And by locality, they mean the locality where the money resides, not where you reside. There's a small difference here. It's a technicality because most of the time your money resides where you reside, right? But it's where your money resides, that's where you should give your zakat. The Hanafis, they say, except in two situations. One is if someone has more of a merit to your money. An example of this is extended family or in-laws, for instance, because you have a relationship with them. So if I have cousins, if I have extended family, for me in Palestine, for instance, then in the Hanafi method, they would take precedence over my locality, like they get bumped up, right? Another example is if there's someone outside your locality that's in dire need. So a good example here is in Howard County, if there's not enough people that are zakat eligible, that are Muslim, and we're going to get to talk about the zakat eligible groups of people, then you can go outside. You can go to Baltimore, you can go outside that and pay the zakat. There's nothing wrong with that. But all this to say is that for us, the preference is that we give it local first. We give it local first, unless there's someone else outside has a more of a merit, right? The Prophet ﷺ, the reason for this is when the Prophet ﷺ sent Mu'adh to Yemen, it's a long hadith. Part of it at the end, he said, and if they obey you to do so, meaning in prayer, then teach them that Allah has made it obligatory for them to pay the zakah from their property, and it is to be taken from the wealthy among them and given to the poor of them, meaning the people there, right? And a part of the wisdom of that is that the people that are in need, they mix with those that have wealth. And so they will expect a share of that zakah. They see the businesses that are thriving and they expect a share of that zakah. And so it's important that we bring happiness to their heart for that reason, right? The scholars mentioned that as a benefit. It's permissible to give zakat in advance, up to a year. So how does that look like? Let's say your zakat due date, the way you calculate it is the 15th of Sha'ban. On the 1st of Muharram, I'm made aware through social services, like the Masjid Social Services Group, of a zakat case of someone that's in need. And I want to help that, but I want to deduct it from my zakat that I'm going to give in Sha'ban. No problem. You give the money with intention of zakat, and when your zakat due date comes, you just subtract that amount because you already gave it in advance, right? Generally speaking, you should not give your zakat delayed, right? There are sometimes circumstances that necessitate that, but generally speaking, you should not do that. When zakat comes, you should give your zakat, right? And we spoke about some of those circumstances earlier. So when your zakat due date comes, you calculate your zakatable assets and give, right? This is a Hanafi opinion, and it makes your life significantly easier. What do I mean by that? So let's draw something. So let's say I have, let's see, annotate. How do I draw? Okay. So let's say this is when your house starts, this date right here. Let's call it 09/01. So that's Ramadan first, right? And this is next year, 09/01, right? And on this day, on this haul, I had, let's say, $10,000, right? On this day right here, on the last day of Sha'ban, I inherited from my rich uncle $5 million. The next day I give zakah, right? What do I pay on? Do I pay on what I had prior to this 5 million? Or do I pay on the whole thing? The Hanafis say, just when your zakat due date comes, just see what you have and you pay on it. And that makes life so much easier. The other madhahib, what they say is that you can't add to your existing assets. So like this has a new hawl. Does that make sense? But that makes it really difficult to calculate, right? Especially in our modern world, calculating it. So most of the fiqh councils, to make life easy, they say just take the Hanafi opinion. Just when your zakat due date comes, whatever you have in your account that day, minus debts, minus immediate payments, right? So debts, example of this is my next mortgage payment for the upcoming month. I subtract it from my zakatable assets. My next credit card payment, my next payments like that. If I have something, an income that is about to come in, I will add that too. But it's all in the next month. You don't add anything more than that, right? So let me clear this, clear all drawings. Okay. Exit. Yep. Okay. Okay. So who's deserving of zakah? The poor, the fuqara. So poor are those that have insufficient resources, So that means they have something, but they don't have enough. Generally, enough is categorized as below the nisab, but there's difference of opinion there. The needy, masakin. Masakin are people that don't have anything. And some scholars, they flip it around. They say fuqara don't have anything, masakin have something. But the point is those that are in need. You can just roughly say it. And these should make up the bulk of the people that are receiving zakah. I mentioned that for a reason. Just remember that. And inshallah, we'll talk about it in a bit. Zakah workers, al-amilina alayha. This was traditionally understood to be the ones that were appointed by the state. Some of the scholars expand this meaning to say also those that are a part of charitable organizations. So the operational cost of running that and distributing the zakah would be included. I've asked my teachers about transactional costs of credit card companies. So let's say I'm giving my zakah and I do it through a credit card and there's some type of fee. Is that included in this? And my teacher's answer was no, because there's no benefit to anyone because of that, right? So which means that if you're giving your zakat al-fitr and you're going to pay it through something that has a transactional fee, make sure you pad your payment to cover the transactional fee as well. Otherwise, pay through a different way, right? Those who are to be reconciled. And this was traditionally understood you can use zakat to give money to the leaders of non-Muslims if their hearts were close to Islam, to encourage them. Umar ibn al-Khattab abolished this category, right? And he said that now Islam has the upper hand, there's no point of this. Some of the modern scholars say, well, there might be a point of it now, right? And so they'll say, this might include, for instance, new converts who suffer alienation, leaders who might have influence on over some non-Muslims, and so on and so forth. Allah knows best, right? There's a difference of opinion on it. Emancipation of slaves was used. Those that are in debt. So as long as the debtor needs the financial aid to pay an immediate lawful debt, right? So a debt that needs to be paid immediately and is lawful, they would be included. Number 7 is a controversial one. It's fi sabilillah, in the way of Allah. This was traditionally understood to mean those that are fighting in the way of Allah. So it actually meant like funding an expedition or a battle. Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, may Allah preserve him, he said in modern times, you can, and there's some precedent for this from some of the tabi'in and companions, that you can actually expand this meaning to be anything that serves the purpose of making the word of God superior. So that can mean educational endeavors. It can mean like Islamic schooling. All of those would fall under the category of fi sabilillah. This is a slippery slope, because what's happening today in the marketplace of zakah is that every organization is claiming zakat eligibility based on this category. What could happen, and what the fear of that is, that the specific categories where zakah was primarily intended for, which are the needy, will get left off if all of our zakah wealth goes, quote unquote, in the way of Allah, fi sabilillah, right? So it's a slippery slope. I'm not saying don't do it. I think there is an argument, and many, mashallah, many modern scholars who are of serious weight have allowed this, including my teachers. They allow this. However, be careful perhaps not to give all of your wealth in the way of Allah, this category, if it's going to be to a school or some type of Islamic organization of that nature, so that a good portion of your wealth can still goes to those that have humanitarian needs. And the wayfarer, this is someone who's stuck and is unable to reach his home base, wherever that may be, his place of residence, and doesn't have access to his wealth. So he might have wealth, he just doesn't have access to it, and he needs a way to get back. So they would be eligible.
Does the person that you're giving zakat to, do they have to request a zakat, or can you give them even though that they haven't requested?
They don't need to request it. Yeah.
Okay. Zakah.
Oh yeah. Okay, there's some questions on YouTube. Sorry, I missed those. Let me see. So please clarify the Hanafi position on how much gold jewelry do you have to pay zakat on it. Also, is it different? Is it if it's used regularly? So the jewelry is the exact same as the nisab. This is the Hanafi position. There's no difference. So it's 85 grams, and it's no difference if it's used regularly or not. That's the whole purpose, right? The whole purpose of that is that anything that you have for jewelry, whether you wear it daily or you wear it once a year, would be zakatable in the Hanafi madhab. And the proof for that is the verse in the Quran where Allah says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن كثيرا من الأحبار والرهبان لا يأكلون أموال الناس بالباطل ويصدون عن سبيل الله والذين يكنزون الذهب والفضة ولا ينفقونها في سبيل الله فبشرهم بعذاب أليم. That those who hoard gold and silver and don't give it in the way of God, then give them news of a grievous punishment. So the Hanafi says this verse is general. So it would encompass personal jewelry as well, because Allah says those who hold gold and silver, and the hadiths that might restrict it are not of the weight that can restrict a verse that is this general, meaning the strength of those hadiths. The other scholars say no, it is. And for those that know usul al-fiqh, this is all due to how the Hanafis do takhsis of al-am. And the takhsis can only be done of the am based on a specific category of evidence. It can't be ahad. If you don't understand that, no problem. But for those that do, that's the reason the Hanafis differ on this issue. If I had the intention of selling it after 5 to 10 years, when it really appreciates, no problem. If you have that intention, then it does not count. You do not need to give zakah on that real estate. You do not need to give zakah on that real estate, right? No. Okay. Can you have the PowerPoint, inshallah? Yeah, I wouldn't mind, inshallah. I can maybe post it in the comments in the YouTube with the ta'ala.
Did you mention cars?
Cars are personal property. The Prophet ﷺ says there is no zakah on a person's house, his horse, and his slaves. You know, of course, there are no slaves now. Alhamdulillah, Islam encouraged the abolishment of slavery. But what the Prophet ﷺ is saying is that in personal things, you don't pay zakah on. Does that answer your? Of course, if the purpose, anything that is personal, that then you want to use for a business asset, right? Like for merchandise, takes a ruling of merchandise. Does that make sense, Tariq?
Yeah.
But if I'm a car collector and I have 6 cars and I just do that for me, there's no zakah on those 6 cars.
Okay, Zakah.
Okay, who should not receive zakah? Number 1, non-Muslims. And this is by the consensus of the scholars. So non-Muslims do not receive zakah. Now, you can give, and you should give those, you should give non-Muslim sadaqah if they're in need. Absolutely. However, zakah in its particular form, because it's a religious obligation, is to be given to Muslims. So this is important. Number 2, you can't give zakah to someone who you are responsible for spending on. Your wife, your parents, or your children. So there's a difference of opinion. So as a man, who are you responsible? So this is for men, because they have the financial obligation in the family. Who are you responsible for spending on? The scholars would agree, your wife and children. The scholars also agree, your parents and your parents. So you're responsible for your parents. What they disagree on, wait, there's some chat. I can't read 4 chats. So if you have questions, please on Zoom, just inshallah unmute so that I can do it. But I'll read it for now. Can you expand upon the 2.5%? Okay, inshallah, I'll get to that question in a minute. But yeah, going back to who you're responsible for spending, your parents, your children, everyone agrees on. What about your grandchildren and your grandparents and anyone above or below those, like going up or going down? Most of the scholars say yes as well. You're responsible for them. Some say no, it's restricted to your parents and your children. I believe that's a Maliki position, right? I need to double check on that. So, but generally speaking, you cannot give zakah to your parents, right? What about a woman? Can a woman give zakah to her parents? There's a difference of opinion on this. Most of the scholars say yes, because a woman is not responsible for spending on her parents. Does that make sense? But a man is. Okay, someone who does not need it. Can a woman give zakat to her husband? Again, the answer is yes, because a woman is not responsible for spending on her husband. So if she chooses to give zakat to him, she can. Someone who does not need it, okay, that goes without saying. It doesn't meet the minimal threshold. And they're descendants of Hashim. So like the descendants of Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib or Al-Abbas or Sayyidina Aqil or Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, meaning the family of the Prophet ﷺ. There is a hadith that the family of the Prophet ﷺ does not receive the zakah, right? And there's difference of opinion on this. Does this also mean after the death of the Prophet ﷺ and his immediate family? Like, does this extend until the Day of Judgment or not? There's a difference of opinion on this. All right, so some of the questions here. Can you expand upon 2.5%? Is this general consensus? Yes. Yes, it's general consensus. It's found in the Quran or Hadith. It's found in the Hadith. hadith of giving zakah from gold and silver. Does it ever change, or will it be 2.5%? It'll be 2.5% forever. This is one of those things that cannot be rationalized, which I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, that there's parts of zakat that are not rationalized. One of them is the amount, 2.5%. You can rationalize it being small so that it doesn't consume your wealth. You can't rationalize why 2.5 and not 3, right? And there's in some cases, depending on the product. So 2.5, Brother Murtada, it's for it is for currency, for gold, silver, currency, and business merchandise. However, the zakah for land, crops from land, specific types of crops, is different, right? Depending if it's naturally irrigated or not, it's either 5 or 10%. If a person finds like naturally mined metals in the Hanafi madhab, that's 20%, right? If they find a treasure, that's 20% due immediately, like just stumbles upon a treasure in their backyard, right? So there are certain categories where it goes above 2.5%, but they're not as relevant for most of us, so we're not talking about them in detail. If you want to find people to give zakah in Howard County, I would, inshallah, I'm going to mention this at the end, I'd recommend giving it to the zakah committees, because like, for instance, our dear Uncle Anwar Khan, who runs the MFC Zakah committee, he, mashallah, he's been working with the families in Howard County for decades right now that are in need, and so he's aware of them. And also part of this is to save their honor, right? But yes, you can always speak to him if you want to, or you can just give your zakah for it to be distributed through the organization. All right. If anyone has questions, please do continue to chat. Put them. We're approaching the end here. Okay, Zakatul Fitr. So this is important because it's Ramadan. Zakatul Fitr is a charity given at the end of the month of Ramadan for every member of your household, if you are able to possess a minimal amount of nisab plus some personal property. There's like some nuances there I'm not going to get into. The question of every member of your household, there's a difference on. In the Hanafi madhab, you're not responsible for other adults in your household or your spouse, which means the woman would give her own zakatul fitr. The man would give his own zakatul fitr. Other adults in the household, you might have a multi-generational family, they give their own zakatul fitr. That's in the Hanafi madhab. In other madhahib, it's just the head of household pays for the entire house. And this is probably more of it's a real difference, but substantively, just work it out between you and your spouse, collect the money and give it, practically speaking, just make it happen, however that happens, right? The amount, so in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, he said it will be a sa', right, of barley or of dates. A sa' is an ancient measurement, right? And the other madhabs say you'd have to give it from that, either a sa' or half a sa' if you're going to convert to wheat or some other stable household item, but you have to give stable household items of that to the needy. The Hanafis say no, you can give zakah its value worth. So it doesn't need to be the food item itself. It could be cash. And I mean, I feel a little strongly about the Hanafi position here because most people have access to food somehow. Like even if they don't have food themselves, they can get access to food as long as they have someone to help them identify those resources in a food pantry or whatnot. What people don't have access to today is cash for their needs. And so giving in cash makes more sense, in our modern context. And this is the opinion of a lot of fiqh councils as well as a Hanafi position. It's roughly equal to $10 a person. So for every member of your household, if you're pregnant, some of the companions used to give it for their unborn child, right? The child that's still pregnant, but you don't have to. But I believe it's Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan that would do that. And it's a nice gesture, but you don't have to, of course. It should be given before their Eid prayer. In an ideal scenario, one day or the morning of Eid, you would actually go and give it to the needy. Logistically speaking, that's really difficult. That's really difficult to do, and especially in our modern days, right? So some of the scholars, they allow giving zakah, I believe the Shafi'is, as early as the first of Ramadan to give your zakatul fitr. Others say 2 days, others say a week. The point is, because of the logistical challenges, especially in a COVID world where we're on stay-at-home orders, giving it early is important so that it can be distributed in time. It can be distributed in time. So I would encourage you to give your zakat al-fitr today or in the next few days, inshallah. Can be paid to all those eligible to receive zakah. And also, please make sure to cover the transactional fees of credit cards, as we mentioned. So if I'm going to mention how to give, inshallah, through MFC if you want to, and what the transactional fees there are in the next slide. There is a couple questions here. Do you have to go through the actual process of calculating zakah? You should, you should, Ayman. It's important to actually know what you need to do, and then buffer it with something much more. But you should actually go through the process of calculating it. Yes, right. It doesn't need to be as exact to the dollar, but like between 100 and 200 is a huge discrepancy, right? So you should have, you should know a little bit more than that. Another question, wife, I have $5,000 in my account. I don't have regular income. Can my husband give my zakah instead of me? So zakah is due. So if he chooses to, and that means the right of the money was given, but then you have to give that money every year. So that 5,000, so 2.5% of that, if assuming that 5,000 has been in your account for 1 lunar year, then yes, he can give that on your behalf, right? But it has to be with that intention. So that's clear. So he would speak to him and say, make this this amount that you're giving for zakah, make it with the intention that it's covering my amount, right? And if you do that, then it's okay. Brother Walid, if you rewind, inshallah, I spoke about 401k. Maybe after, and you can review the lecture, inshallah. Another question here, just to clarify, how do you account for student debt? For student debt, as well as any other long-standing debt, you only remove the immediate upcoming payment. So let's say your next month's payment is $1,000 is what you have in your kind of your student payment debt schedule or whatever. Then that's what you would remove. Yeah.
Is anything above 2.5%? Is that just sadaqah at that point?
Yeah, anything above 2.5% is sadaqah. And it's good to pad it. So it's good to give extra, it's good to give extra. Yeah. Okay. So how to give zakah if you want to give it through Muslim Family Center. If you do Zelle does a direct transfer of the money from your account. And so there's 0 transaction fees on it, which means you don't need to pad it at all. However, if you want to do it through a credit card or PayPal, you can go to that link on the Muslim Family Center website, the donate, and you click zakah on the top, or you click zakah in that website, and then you can add 3% fees if you're going to give your zakah that way. If you want someone to pick it up, you can contact Zakat, and inshallah we can arrange that for you as well if you would rather do it in paper as a check. And when you select on the page, just make sure you select the what you want. Zakatul mal is your general zakah. Sadaqah is anything. Zakatul fitr is if you're paying. If you're doing Zelle, then make a note that this is for Zakatul fitr so that it can be put in the correct bucket and distributed accordingly. Isa, did I answer your question on student debt? Okay, if you have any questions, we're done with the presentation. You can either submit it or you can join Zoom, and I'll be happy to admit you, inshallah, to the meeting. Whoa, what am I doing? See participants, where did you guys go? Oh, there you are. Okay, excellent, alhamdulillah. All right, unless anyone has any other questions, I think
what if you're unsure of the person's financial status, but they're requesting zakat?
So as a general rule of thumb, taught it is that this is a good question, and it's a problem with a lot of zakat committees that are actually distributing the zakat, and it's for this reason, because it's 2 things. Number 1, there are 2 conflicting interests. One is you don't want to give foolish people your money. Allah says that. وَلَا تُؤْتُوا السُّفَهَاءَ أَمْوَالَكُمْ. Don't give foolish people your money, right? The other thing is you need to have mercy, right? And so, you need to balance your dotting your I's and crossing your T's with making it easy for those that are actually in need to receive their money. Does that make sense? And those two sometimes conflict, right? And so when that happens, what you need to do is what's called ghalabatul dhann. See, in Islam, most of the rulings are based on a high degree of reasonable doubt. Like I have a high degree that of certainty in something. It's not based on perfect certainty. Like a good example of this is the time for iftar. If you're out and you don't have a watch and you can see the horizon from far, like you're taking estimates. It could be a minute off. It could be 2 minutes off. It's just based on a high degree of certainty, let's say above 75%. So what you want to do as a zakat committee is you want to make the form such that you collect enough information, right, to the best of your ability, that I have a good amount of information that will give me some 75% or something above that, like around that amount, that this person is actually in need, right? But you can't uncover every small thing either, right? So there's a balance there, and I think it's an art that witnessing how our zakat committee does it, you learn over years, right? So you can even speak to our zakat committee and see Brother Anwar what his tools of the trade are there. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. Jazakallah.
You're welcome. Anything else? طيب, inshallah, you can always if you have any questions for me, you can always someone's joining through iPhone, so maybe let me okay, there's a couple more. What if the source of income is only through bank interest, like when we get old? So that's a problem, because bank interest is haram, and so it's something that should not be a source of income, right? And so I would advise, if someone has that situation, and I would advise you to find alternative ways to invest your money and to purify that wealth, right? Because that wealth, haram wealth, is not zakatable, because it should be getting rid of altogether, right? So yeah, I would encourage you to look into that. Allahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. Allah knows best. Okay, inshallah. If anyone has any questions for me moving forward, you can always reach me at imam@muslimfamilycenter.org. I can type it in here. So you can always reach me at Bismillah Imam. I'm just going to put it right here. Imam@muslimfamilycenter.org. Or if you go to muslimfamilycenter.org, you can make an appointment if you have something more complicated that you want to discuss, inshallah. Okay, last one. If woman only has gold jewelry but no cash, can husband pay zakat on that? Yeah, so a husband can pay zakat on behalf of their wife. If she has her gold jewelry that is above the amount of the nisab, as we mentioned earlier, then you want to approximate how much gold there is, real gold, not jewelry, not the cost of jewelry, because diamond is not zakatable. So go to a jeweler, figure out how much gold and silver is actually zakatable, approximate the amount. And then when you give the zakah, if you want to gift this to her so she can give it on her behalf, i.e. give it on her behalf, that's okay, but it has to be done with that intention. So when you give, make the intention that you do that. Does husband need to ask her to pay for her or just calculate? Either way is okay. I would definitely encourage every person to try to calculate themselves, but if you want to help your wife or your spouse in general doing that, there's no problem. That can be done, inshallah. But at the end of the day, an individual is responsible for their own wealth. So if you help them with it, that's good. But they're responsible for their own wealth. If you don't do that, there's no sin on you.
Is there a certain madhab that allows you to not pay zakat on your jewelry? Because I see some people they wear their jewelry, at least once a year to make sure they don't pay zakat on it.
All right, Tada, I'm gonna ask you to correct the question. This is just a fiqh exercise. Okay. So you said, is there a certain madhab that requires you to not pay zakat on your jewelry? Where did you make a mistake in the question?
Come on, man.
So the question should be on gold and silver. Remember, we always come back to that because it's
Yeah.
only gold and silver that are zakatable. So the question is there any madhab that does not require you to pay zakat on personal gold and silver? And we covered that in the beginning of the presentation, but yes, the majority don't require you to, right?
Okay.
So the Shafi'is, the Hanbalis, the Malikis, they do not require you to pay zakat on personal gold and silver that is used for jewelry. And the intention when getting it was to wear it, not as an investment. That's really key, right?
Okay.
No matter how large that amount is. However, again, the position that I hold here is that it is zakatable wealth. It is zakatable wealth, but there is another position. If that's what you learned and that's what you're comfortable with, no problem whatsoever, inshallah.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Any other questions? طيب, alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair, everyone. Again, if you can always reach me offline if you need to. If you have any questions, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless you and bless your families. Please do give your zakah earlier rather than later, inshallah, especially zakatul fitr in particular. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless you. Jazakumullahu khairan. Don't forget, there's iftar tonight, drive-through. The group has been working extremely hard on that. You're going to be amazed about how organized it is. I'm telling you, they have maps, they have walkie-talkies, they have ongoing video conference lines. The volunteers that are running this iftar drive-through today are the real deal. They have stickers on the food with QR codes. MashaAllah. So if you want to see ihsan in action, and I hope I'm not going to disappoint now the group, but if you want to see ihsan in action, come tonight and get your drive-through iftar, inshallah. Inshallah. We invited our local congregations as well. They might be joining us. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wal 'asri, innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus salihati wa tawassaw bil haqqi wa tawassaw bis sabr. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalam.